that the producers, far left-wing activists in Hollywood, are turning on her, and Disney has canceled all of Rachel Zegler's appearances on their media platforms. Kind of tough.
And there is no resolution in sight for the Walt Disney Company when it comes to Snow White 2025 at the box office. This is exactly why Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, is in pure panic mode over not just the Rachel Zegler backlash, but the entire backlash surrounding this movie in general.
The fairy tale is officially a fiasco. Rachel Zegler, once hailed as Disney's rising star, is now Hollywood's latest cautionary tale, with the studio pulling the plug on her press appearances and rebooting Snow White before her version even hits theaters. Insiders are calling it one of the biggest PR disasters in Disney's modern history. But how did a billion-dollar brand end up in full-blown damage control mode? And why are even Disney's most loyal defenders turning their backs on the remake that was supposed to redefine a classic? Buckle up, because the glass coffin isn't just symbolic anymore. This is the story of how a princess lost her crown, took a studio down with her, and triggered a remake of a remake before audiences ever saw the first one. Once hailed as Hollywood's next golden girl, Rachel Zegler's rise was nothing short of meteoric. Practically unknown before 2021, she exploded onto the scene with West Side Story, dazzling critics and audiences alike. She wasn't just another ingenue. She had the voice, the look, the pedigree. Steven Spielberg handpicked her, after all. The film was positioned as a revival of old Hollywood magic, and Zegler was its shining centerpiece. Headlines praised her as the future of the silver screen, and awards buzz clung to her like glitter. Rachel Zegler wasn't just arriving, she was ascending. So when Disney announced her as the new face of Snow White, it felt like a coronation. The studio rolled out the red carpet with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for billion-dollar franchises. This wasn't going to be a simple retelling. They promised a bold new vision for a modern era. No damsels, no helplessness, no waiting for a prince. This Snow White would be empowered, and Zegler, fresh off her industry breakthrough, was the chosen one to lead the charge. To Disney, she represented a new kind of fairy tale, progressive, fearless, unapologetic. But from the moment the casting dropped, a storm began to brew. It started subtly, just murmurs on Twitter and comment threads. Fans raised eyebrows over Zegler's casting as a character famously described as having skin as white as snow. While some praised the move as inclusive and forward-thinking, others questioned whether Disney was simply baiting controversy for clicks. But that was just the beginning. The first real cracks started to show not in the casting, but in the press junkets. From the start, Zegler's interviews struck a strange chord. What was meant to be promotional magic started sounding more like performance art, drenched in social commentary. Instead of leaning into nostalgia, Zegler openly mocked the original story's themes. She called the prince a guy who literally stalks her, and dismissed the central romance as weird. At first, people thought she was joking. Maybe it was media training gone wrong. Maybe it was just a 22-year-old trying to sound edgy and woke. But as more clips surfaced, the tone was clear. This wasn't Snow White as audiences remembered her. This was a takedown, a rebranding. Zegler wasn't just playing the character. She was deconstructing her. And fans weren't having it. The backlash was swift, sharp, and viral. One by one, sound bites from Zegler's interviews spread like wildfire across social media. TikTok turned her comments into memes. YouTube critics made entire video essays tearing apart her remarks. Hashtags like hashtag #NotMySnowWhite and hashtag #BoycottDisney started trending. What was supposed to be an empowering reimagining had become, in the eyes of many, a hostile rejection of everything the original stood for. And Zegler, once Hollywood's newest sweetheart, suddenly found herself on the receiving end of a cultural avalanche. What made it worse was her tone. Instead of walking things back or clarifying her words, Zegler doubled down. She spoke about Snow White being a leader, not someone dreaming of love. She claimed she wouldn't have taken the role if it had been written the same way as the 1937 classic. While her intention may have been feminist empowerment, the delivery came off as smug, dismissive, and, perhaps most damning of all, ungrateful. To longtime Disney fans, it felt like a slap in the face. The original Snow White wasn't just a movie. It was the birth of the Disney empire, a cornerstone of animation history. And now, the very actress chosen to carry that legacy was all but spitting on it. The discourse spiraled. Every new clip, every old quote, every facial expression became fodder. Zegler's past tweets were unearthed. Her West Side Story acclaim was re-examined. And somewhere along the way, the narrative flipped. Rachel Zegler was no longer the breakout star of a Spielberg hit. She was the girl who killed a fairy tale, the poster child of a studio's identity crisis. And suddenly, all eyes turned from admiration to scrutiny. It was the spectacular, slow-motion unraveling of Hollywood's chosen princess, undone not by scandal or sabotage, but by a microphone and a message that missed its mark. By the time Rachel Zegler's Snow White interviews had circulated through every social platform, the internet had already made up its mind. What began as scattered discontent ignited into full-blown digital rebellion. You couldn't scroll TikTok or YouTube without tripping over parody videos, angry rants, and viral edits mocking Zegler's disdain for the original film. Fan-made memes spliced her soundbites with clips of the 1937 animation, painting her as the villain of her own movie. Hashtags like #FireRachelZegler, #NotMySnowWhite, and the damning hashtag #BoycottDisney trended on and off for weeks, gathering millions of views and impressions. And this wasn't just the usual outrage cycle. This felt different. The internet wasn't simply calling her out, it was turning her into a symbol. For many, Zegler came to represent everything they hated about modern Hollywood. The perceived contempt for classics, the performative feminism, the self-righteous rebranding of beloved stories in the name of progress. She wasn't seen as an actress playing a role anymore. She was the spokesperson of a movement no one asked for. And once the fans turned on her, the snowball became an avalanche. Behind closed doors, the mood at Disney reportedly shifted from confident to catastrophic. Early test screenings of Snow White were, in a word, cold. Multiple sources leaked that audiences were confused by the tone of the film, an awkward tug-of-war between legacy and reinvention. The prince's role was allegedly so reduced, he barely registered. The iconic songs? Some cut, some rewritten. The famous kiss? Removed entirely or reframed beyond recognition. Test audiences didn't feel enchanted. They felt lectured. And the magic, Disney's signature, foolproof magic, was nowhere to be found. Whispers of internal panic started surfacing. Leaks from anonymous Disney insiders painted a picture of chaos. "We don't know how to market this," one source reportedly said. "There's no angle that isn't controversial." Another insider confessed, "It was supposed to be empowering, but it's coming off as smug and hollow." And Rachel's comments have made it worse. Even more damning, rumors swirled that top Disney execs were rethinking the release strategy entirely. Delays, reshoots, or worst of all, the dreaded quiet dump onto streaming. Meanwhile, Zegler's press tour only poured gasoline on the fire. With every new interview, her public image slid further out of control. Instead of calming the storm, her tone grew sharper, more defensive. In one clip, she brushed off the backlash as people afraid of strong women. In another, she claimed she didn't owe anyone nostalgia. And perhaps the most viral, her laughing off the idea of needing a prince, saying, "I wouldn't be caught dead waiting for some guy to save me." In isolation, these might have seemed harmless. But by now, the internet was watching her like a hawk, ready to pounce. Every eye roll, every smirk, every word became another reason to cancel her. Worse still, the attitude came off less like empowerment and more like ego. Zegler, once praised for her humility in West Side Story, now seemed untouchable, out of touch, even arrogant. Gone was the grateful newcomer. In her place stood someone critics now described as sanctimonious, dismissive, and shockingly unaware of her audience. It didn't help that she repeatedly referred to the original Snow White as dated, creepy, and problematic, while simultaneously boasting about her own version's moral superiority. To lifelong Disney fans, this felt like sacrilege. And to casual viewers, just another reason to tune out. The backlash wasn't just social, it became cultural. Major YouTubers, film critics, and even mainstream media outlets began questioning Disney's judgment. Think pieces titled, "Did Disney Just Destroy Its Own Legacy?" and Rachel Zegler and the Death of the Fairy Tale began circulating. The online discourse wasn't about one film anymore. It had evolved into a referendum on Disney's entire direction. And at the center of it all, like a lightning rod in a hurricane, stood Zegler. To make matters worse, attempts to course-correct only backfired. PR statements were issued, emphasizing intentions of inclusivity and modern storytelling. But fans weren't buying it. Interviews were abruptly cut short. Sound bites were pulled from circulation. Disney reportedly began limiting Zegler's media appearances altogether. Damage control was in full effect, but it was like trying to mop up a flood with a napkin. Then came the rumored reshoots. Word leaked that Disney was quietly reworking parts of the film, not just to soften its message, but to add back in moments fans had demanded. The kiss, the prince, maybe even some original music. But now, even that seemed like too little, too late. The studio that once ruled childhood dreams was now stuck in a nightmare of its own making. Rachel Zegler didn't just lose the public. She lost the narrative. And for Disney, what was supposed to be a triumphant reimagining had spiraled into one of the biggest PR crises in the studio's modern history. By the end of the year, the buzz had gone silent. Not just faded, vanished. The once hyped Snow White remake, Disney's so-called bold reinvention, slipped into the background like a movie that had never existed. There was no press junket, no magazine covers, no late-night interviews, no red carpet. The studio that had spent over a year selling Rachel Zegler as the future face of their fairy tale empire now acted as if she were never part of it at all. The signs were subtle at first. A delayed trailer, then a sudden re-edit of promotional clips, this time with fewer Zegler soundbites and more vague visuals. Forest scenes, talking animals, sweeping CGI shots. Everything but the actual star. Next, press events were postponed indefinitely. Rumors leaked that scheduled interviews with Zegler were being canceled with no reschedule in sight. Studio insiders claimed she was too polarizing and a distraction from the film's message. Then came the final nail. Disney officially announced there would be no theatrical premiere. No glitzy Hollywood rollout. No influencer-packed events. No gown, no glass slipper. Just a quiet digital drop, buried under other content on Disney+. It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral. A slow, silent burial for a film once crowned the jewel of the studio's live-action revival era. Fans noticed immediately. Social media lit up with confusion. Wait, didn't Disney already make a Snow White remake? Became a common comment under other Snow White content. Zegler's version, barely a year old, was already being scrubbed from the cultural memory. YouTubers who had covered the controversy began uploading post-mortem breakdowns with titles like The Snow White That Disney Wants You to Forget and Rachel Zegler's Vanishing Act. But the true twist didn't come until the reboot. In what felt like a surreal marketing whiplash, Disney stunned everyone by announcing yet another Snow White project. Less than a year after finishing the last, a new version was suddenly in early development. But this time, the pitch wasn't bold or reimagined or subversive. It was humble, almost apologetic. The press release emphasized returning to the roots of the original fairy tale, with classic themes of love, innocence, and courage. There was even a quote about recapturing the timeless magic that made Snow White a beloved character for generations. Translation? Back to basics. Back to safe. Insiders spilled the tea almost instantly. The new production was being fast-tracked with a new script, new cast, new music. Everything wiped clean. The project Zegler had carried for nearly 2 years was being erased from canon, quietly and efficiently. Even more shocking, multiple sources said this wasn't just a reboot, but a reset. Disney was allegedly toying with a full-on fairy tale cinematic universe, and Zegler's Snow White? Not part of the plan. Executives, once too proud to admit defeat, now adopted a strategy of strategic silence. No apology, no retraction, just a corporate pivot. The narrative became, we're giving the audience what they want. And the implication was clear, they never wanted this version in the first place. Rachel Zegler, once the studio's golden girl, disappeared from Disney's future slate entirely. Her name was no longer attached to any upcoming projects. Her image was removed from the Disney parks' promotional tie-ins. And while she continued acting in other films, the Snow White era was locked in a vault, an embarrassment the Mouse House clearly wanted buried deeper than the evil queen's mirror. The reboot's casting was announced with careful precision. A fresh face, no controversy, no bold declarations. A charming prince included from day one. Familiar songs restored. And, as if to twist the knife, the first teaser trailer was scored with "Someday My Prince Will Come." The message was subtle but unmistakable. This is the Snow White you remember. This is the one you'll love. The industry watched with morbid fascination. Never before had a studio so publicly and so silently rejected its own modernized vision. In a business where image is everything, Disney had just committed the cardinal sin, admitting failure, even if they never used those exact words. And the fallout wasn't just for Zegler. Other studios took note. Suddenly, subversive remakes were being reevaluated. Legacy characters were being treated with more reverence. It was as if Zegler's Snow White had become a cautionary tale not just for fans, but for Hollywood itself. Some called it justice. Others called it scapegoating. But either way, the message was clear. The audience still held the final say. And in this case, they'd spoken loud and clear. Rachel Zegler's rise may have been meteoric, but her fall was a masterclass in how fast the culture can turn, how fragile a studio's faith can be, and how even a princess can vanish without a trace when the kingdom decides it's time to move on. By the time Disney unveiled its sanitized Snow White reboot, the damage had already been done. And we're not just talking about fan backlash or Rachel Zegler's fall from grace. This was bigger, deeper, a ripple effect that extended far beyond one film. This was the kind of chaos that shakes a studio's confidence to its core. Let's start with the obvious, the money. When Snow White was first announced, Disney projected it as a guaranteed billion-dollar tentpole. Analysts spoke in confident soundbites. It's a slam dunk. You can't mess up Snow White. Merchandisers rushed to production. Dolls, costumes, makeup kits, even themed tiaras started rolling out to big box stores months before the film's release. And the price tags weren't shy. This wasn't just a movie, it was supposed to be a movement. But when the backlash hit, the shelves stayed full. Eerily full. Across Walmarts, Targets, and even the Disney store itself, Zegler-branded Snow White merchandise began gathering dust. Dolls were discounted by 40%, then 60%, then quietly pulled. Halloween came and went, and kids weren't dressing up as Snow White. Not this one. Costume sales flopped. Product tie-ins tanked. In one viral TikTok, a retail worker filmed a display of Snow White dolls marked clearance next to a stack of Barbie merch that had completely sold out. The caption read, "Y'all picked your princess." Financial analysts began revising their forecasts. Disney had poured north of $200 million into production and marketing for a film that wasn't just critically divisive, it was commercially radioactive. And it didn't stop at toys. The park saw it too. A planned Snow White-themed refresh for Disneyland Paris? Quietly shelved. An entire Disney World parade segment? Recut. All tied to one thing. The Zegler version had become box office kryptonite. But the most telling sign of corporate chaos came from within. The leaks. In a wave of anonymous reports and internal memos, a clearer picture started to form. And it was not pretty. One leaked document revealed that Disney's marketing and PR departments were in active disagreement months before the film's release. Execs clashed over how much of Zegler's now notorious interviews should be included in promos. One team insisted her voice be the centerpiece. She was the star. After all, another argued for minimal exposure, citing rising negativity on social media. The term containment strategy appeared in multiple emails. Another insider leak exposed even more dysfunction. The film's creative team reportedly tried to course-correct during post-production, adding back romantic elements, softening Snow White's harsh tone, even tweaking the prince's role. But it was too little, too late. Test screenings had already gone cold. One test audience report described the film as weirdly joyless and smug. Another just said, "This isn't Snow White." As these cracks turned into canyons, the critics turned, even the loyal ones. The outlets that usually played nice with Disney, review sites, entertainment magazines, YouTubers who typically got early access and exclusive interviews, started changing their tune. Once it was clear that Disney had entered a PR disaster spiral, those same outlets began publishing brutal think pieces and "Where did this go wrong?" retrospectives. One Variety headline read, "Snow White, the reboot that didn't know who it was for." The Hollywood Reporter called it a masterclass in brand mismanagement. Even mainstream journalists who had previously championed Zegler during her West Side Story era started backing away. The shift was subtle, but devastating. She's talented, no doubt, but the role of Snow White needed more grace, less grit. It was the nice way of saying she wasn't the right fit, and everyone knew it now. And then there was the morale problem. Behind the scenes, employees began leaking screenshots of Slack conversations and internal message boards. Morale was at an all-time low. One anonymous VFX artist posted, "We spent months rendering a movie they're pretending never happened." A marketing team member wrote, "We weren't set up to win. They threw us into the fire and told us to smile." Whispers of exec reshuffling started swirling. Accountability was being quietly shuffled up the chain, but no heads publicly rolled. Disney's classic strategy: deny, delay, disappear. The overall cost? Devastating. Financially, the film became one of the worst-performing live-action remakes in Disney's modern history. Not just in dollars lost, but in brand equity. Snow White, a cornerstone of the Disney legacy, was now a cautionary tale. Investors raised eyebrows. Fans raised pitchforks. And competitors raised the bar, watching from the sidelines and learning exactly what not to do. For Disney, this wasn't just a flop. It was a failure of identity. They'd forgotten who they were talking to. They'd bet big on reinvention without securing the audience. And when the gamble didn't pay off, they did what giant corporations always do: quietly erased the evidence, changed course, and hoped no one noticed. But everyone noticed. This wasn't just about a movie or a star or even a studio. It was about the limits of rebranding nostalgia, about the dangers of chasing a modern audience while alienating the one that's been loyal for decades. It was about the myth of too big to fail. And in this case, that myth had shattered like a poison mirror. In the wake of what insiders now refer to, only half-jokingly, as the Snow White incident, Disney found itself at a crossroads. For a studio that once prided itself on being untouchable, the backlash had been sobering. The lost dollars were one thing, but the lost trust? That was far more dangerous. Because Disney didn't just lose a movie, they lost the narrative, the ability to define the conversation. And if there's one thing Disney knows how to do better than anyone, it's craft a story. So they did what they always do in times of crisis. They hit the reset button. Enter the new Snow White. No edgy reimaginings. No modern lectures. No media circuits full of viral gaffes and smug soundbites. This time, it was all about tone, about returning to the roots. Classic storytelling, hand-drawn influences, orchestral scores. The kind of Disney magic people grew up believing in. And the marketing? It wasn't just a pivot. It was a full atonement arc. The first teaser opened on a single red apple, glistening in a sunbeam, resting on a checkered cloth. A child's humming could be heard in the distance. Then, softly, the familiar notes of "Someday My Prince Will Come." Not remixed, not modernized, just pure. The screen faded to black. Snow White, a return to the fairy tale. Simple, elegant, contrite. Gone was the bravado. Gone were the bold declarations of new vision. This was penitence. A studio whispering to its audience, "We remember. We're sorry. Let us tell it the right way." And perhaps most notably, the team behind it wasn't made of flashy newcomers or headline-friendly hires. Disney brought back legacy animators. Story artists and producers who'd worked on Beauty and the Beast, The Princess and the Frog, even Tangled. There were whispers that the project was seen internally as a soul cleanser. Not just a course correction, but a way to heal the brand from within. The new actress cast as Snow White. Practically unknown. A fresh face plucked from obscurity, reportedly chosen not for her social media following or her political stances, but because she sang like a Disney princess and cried on cue. A throwback choice. A humble one. But that left the biggest question hanging in the air. Is it too late? Because this wasn't just about fixing Snow White. This was about fixing a broken relationship with the audience. And audiences, once burned, aren't always quick to forget. The online discourse didn't disappear, it simply evolved. Where there was once outrage, now there was suspicion. Skepticism. Headlines shifted from Disney's bold new take to "can they get it right this time?" Comment sections were full of cautious optimism, and more than a few sarcastic reminders. Just don't let her talk about the prince this time. The memes hadn't died, either. Clips from Zegler's old interviews continued to circulate, becoming cautionary footage, exhibits in the court of public opinion. One particularly viral TikTok dubbed her infamous "I don't need a man" quote over a scene from the new teaser, with a caption, "Choose your fighter." Disney had chosen. And this time, they weren't fighting. They were asking. The tone was everywhere. In interviews, in press releases, in the talent. The new director spoke about timeless values. The costume designer said she revisited the 1937 film frame by frame before picking up her sketchpad. Even Bob Iger, in a rare public comment, stated, "This isn't about reinvention. It's about remembrance." That single quote was replayed endlessly, dissected, memed, debated. But it hit the core of what they were trying to do. Still, the damage lingered. Fans had long memories, and Hollywood even longer. Rival studios saw the weakness. Industry insiders began openly questioning Disney's future strategy. Was this about artistic redemption or pure survival? One scathing editorial in The Atlantic dubbed the reboot corporate repentance theater. A glossy apology wrapped in sentimentality. Because while this reboot might look and sound like old-school Disney, audiences knew the stakes now. The innocence was gone. The idea that Disney could do no wrong had been shattered. The company was no longer telling stories from above. It was pitching them from below, hoping the audience might still listen. And yet, in that vulnerability, something strange happened. There were glimmers of hope. Fan pages that had once flamed the company began sharing concept art and praising the return of traditional animation. YouTubers who'd torn the last film apart posted cautiously positive breakdowns of the trailer. Tweets started appearing like, "Okay, wait, this actually looks beautiful," followed by "Don't make me care again," loudly crying faced. And then, something unprecedented. Disney announced that portions of the score were being recorded using original instruments from the 1930s. That animators were consulting the children of original Disney Imagineers. That early screenings would be invite-only for families, not influencers. This wasn't marketing. It was rehabilitation. Slowly, step by step, the studio was trying to earn forgiveness not through spin, but through sincerity. But the question remains, will it work? Because this isn't just a redemption arc, it's a referendum on whether legacy can survive reinvention, on whether audiences, after being burned by tone-deaf arrogance, are even willing to give the studio another chance, on whether Disney can truly put the magic back in the bottle. The final product will have to do more than look right. It has to feel right. It has to win over a generation raised on cynicism and viral outrage. It has to remind people why Disney mattered in the first place. Not because it was perfect, but because it believed in something. And right now, the world doesn't need another lecture or another trend. It needs a fairy tale, a real one,